que les participants peuvent monter au tableau. Yes. Bonjour.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I take great pleasure in being invited by Gérard Mestralet. This gives me the opportunity to thank him for and congratulate him on the work he did on behalf of the government in COP21 regarding the business dialogue. And I would like to begin by that in introducing this panel session on the critical issue, which is this: how can we enhance and increase green finance? As chairperson of COP21, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you that the shift towards the success of COP21 in 2015 took place when we watched the business and investor world shift for the first time in history over the past 21 years, because for 21 years, I remember because I was at the very first Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. Anyway, it was the first time in 2015 that the business and finance world understood that it was important to invest in green finance for two reasons. First, the players understood that the cost of not acting was higher than the cost of acting, and that potentially in climate change there was substantial economic jeopardy and risk for reasons that are very straightforward. In the insurance world, for instance, it's impossible to insure risks for the climate disasters that the world is facing, and investors clearly understood that action was necessary. The second reason is the positive aspect. The investment and business world understood that green finance held a lot of potential in terms of innovation, creating businesses, and added value. And that is what was the catalyst of this shift towards the success of the Paris Accord on climate. Now, of course, if EUROPLACE once again organizes a climate finance day, well, I can only see the upside of that. At COP23, it would be great because it was critical. Now, how can one enhance and increase green finance? I see 5 levers of action, and they are operational. First, mobilizing public and development banks to catalyze private investments. During COP21, as you may recall, $100 billion were pledged by 2020. And then from 2020 onwards, the idea is not to have public finance only, but private finance. Therefore, public finance as a lever. 2 examples. First, the increase in the French Development Agency's potential, 5 billion euros invested in the climate. Second example, the decision made by the G7 countries to put $10 billion on the table on the African Initiative for Renewable Energies. The second lever now, innovation and creation of financing and service products such as green bonds and labels. I was very happy to see that the very first official label of a green fund that was implemented brought together over 1 billion euros in assets under 1 year, labelized assets, Miroba. Philippe Zawati is with us, and he heads the Finance for Tomorrow initiative. And as Gérard Mestralet just pointed out, at the beginning of the year, France issued the largest sovereign green bond, 7 billion euros. We had 21 billion offers from over 100 investors worldwide. Thus, this year, we have become ahead of China, Brazil, and the U.S., the first issuer of green bonds. I would like to commend the work of Agence France Trésor and the banks that have supported this initiative, the success of which has been an objective of mine when I started chairing COP21. The third lever is the reduction of information costs through increased transparency on financial data of corporates. That was the objective of Article 173 of the Energy Transition Law that I presented to Parliament that was adopted. This article, as you know, brings about obligations of information for institutional investors regarding climate-related risks. And more broadly, the article sets environmental and social factors in investment policies. This provision is very much scrutinized internationally, notably in TCFD, the Task Force on Financial Disclosure, which is led by Michael Bloomberg, and the Sustainable Development Expertise Board that was set up by the European Commission, led by Christian Altiman, also with us. The article has to do with investors. It also has an impact on corporates for reporting and the dissemination of information to their investors. Finally, there are two other levers, but progress remains to be done for those two. First of all, restrict the financing of assets that emit CO2, and there are investors who amount to 3,400 billion in assets. Several French players have decided to disinvest in fossil fuels. AXA, Crédit Agricole, SocGen, BNP, and the list should go on. These voluntary commitments should become the norm with the commitment of the public authorities. First, the exchange reserves and the intervention of the central bank should no longer finance fossil fuel and should shift to green assets. And finally, the funds that do hold such assets should not be able to benefit from the tax alleviations of life insurance plans, for instance. Finally, financial regulations that have to be favorable to green activities, and climate detrimental activities should be penalized. I will continue to support the proposal made by the French Banking Federation, which is aimed at bringing about a parameter in the prudential regulations in order to urge banks to invest and loan and lend in areas of green growth. In closing, I'd like to say that we are at a juncture today. Finally, during the Paris Climate Conference, 152 countries ratified the Paris Accord, which is unprecedented. Usually, if you take the Kyoto Protocol, it took 6 or 7 years to ratify it. So this one has been ratified very fast. So the world has understood that we are indeed at a juncture, which means that human beings and the planet go together. And we can no longer consider that nature is something free that we can tap into, and that nature is not here to serve human activities. Man cannot live without nature. And when there's a fight between man and nature, when man loses against nature, actually man wins in the end. That is where there's a paradigm shift. So when France ratified the Paris Accord and the ratification legislation was promulgated in June 2016, only 16 countries had ratified the accord. And as you see, there was quite an acceleration. Finance and the economy must go along with this political acceleration. Let me remind you that in the action plan, in these coalitions that were brought about at the Paris summit, 10,000 cities, regions, territories, 10,000 players of the planet joined in to this coalition, and France spearheaded this. There was the coalition on the price of carbon that played an instrumental role, among others, which is why we have to step up our efforts. That is why you are here today. Thank you. Congratulations. Paris is going to become the financial hub of green finance. And I'd like to share a quick sentence with you. It's a quick proverb, a saying. It goes like this. If you wish to do something, you can find the way to do it. If you wish to do nothing, you have to find an excuse. We no longer have excuses. Climate urgency and climate justice request that we move together. We have a common destiny. We have to consider that the population is growing on this planet, and yet we can live in better conditions with greater justice and fairness, whereas in 7 months' time, we exhaust the natural resources that the planet produces. So the challenge is a great one, and I would like to congratulate the economic players, the business players, the financial players that you represent, the investors that you represent. I would like to congratulate you on your commitment in this struggle that is of concern to us all. Thank you.